Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining. We are in this shared journey together. So take a deep breath and ask, where does the Earth's breath end and where do you and I begin? So sense the presence of the more than human world around us. Perhaps you can see a tree outside or you can hear the birds singing, but just know that you belong. And so today I'm exploring an interdisciplinary idea that, when woven together, may radically shift how we design, heal, and inhabit this planet. The question is, what happens when we apply regenerative design thinking to the design of the psychedelic setting? So, I'm an interdisciplinary designer and researcher exploring the entanglement of human and planetary health through the lens of psychedelics. And I'm currently researching how the sensorial environment can influence consciousness and catalyze ecological transformation. And my work is genuinely interdisciplinary. So I work at the intersection of design and science, applying design thinking to scientific inquiry, and look to ways in which design can disrupt the status quo. So I hold a Material Futures Masters from Central St Martin's, which is the intersection of science, design, and technology. I'm currently studying the MSc Psychedelics, Mind, Medicine, and Culture at the University of Exeter before I will continue with doctoral research in the fall. So my path to this inquiry began in an unusual place. It was in the fashion industry. I worked in the fashion industry for about 10 years and I loved it. I loved the creativity, the expression, but I became increasingly conscious of the industry's devastating impact it has on planetary health. So material cultures like fashion are not merely aesthetic endeavors, but they are material systems linked to biological and ecological processes. But what does this have to do with psychedelics? So I was living inside a Shanghai factory and I witnessed firsthand the devastating impact that industrial production has on both human and planetary systems. And despite sort of shifting my career towards innovation and sustainability, I realized that quickly, without huge shifts in consciousness, that many sustainability solutions would remain in sort of surface level frameworks trapped within anthropocentric systems that prioritize consumption and aesthetics over real systemic transformation. And what kind of setting are we sort of currently living in? Well, late stage capitalism for one, but ultimately, more precisely, an actual consciousness paradigm that fragments wholes into parts, treats symptoms rather than root causes, and mistakes growth for health. So, at this pivotal moment in planetary health, we need consciousness shifting tools that dissolve what ecofeminists and deep ecologists identify as our fundamental alienation, which is the false separation between inner and outer nature and in between human and planetary healing. And this is where psychedelics become relevant. They offer technologies for experiencing non dualistic, interconnected ways of being that could inform new organizational structures and design methodologies that work with rather than against living systems. So, amid a research renaissance, we are conceding that psychedelic assisted therapy is proving incredibly effective for treating multiple mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, PTSD. But it's also been used in clinical broader applications, such as palliative care settings. We do seem, however, to be at a bit of a critical conjuncture where we sort of see opposing perspectives emerge. Some see psychedelics positioned within the biomedical perspective through a biomedical imaginary, which focuses on healing the individual self. And others see psychedelics as sort of tools for our collective liberation, led by the caretakers of our planet, including our more than human community, amongst many other perspectives that are emerging in this new discourse. But looking towards the specific research, we can see that recent studies highlight psychedelics' capacity to strengthen nature relatedness, foster pro environmental attitudes, and amplify nature connectedness when used in natural settings. But there's currently limited sort of evidence on to whether this connectedness can translate into real actionable behavior. Can we position psychedelics as catalysts for regenerative consciousness so that we can become regenerative ourselves and, in consequence, have behavioral shifts? And if so, which conditions might amplify this transformation? Regenerative design offers a framework to think about how we may design the setting with nature, as nature, and for nature. So, research consistently identifies the set and setting, or the mindset and environmental context, as critical determinants of psychedelic outcomes. Timothy Leary, who defined the terms, claimed that 99% of responses derive from these factors. But the problem being, despite widespread recognition, there remains very little comparative data exploring the diversity of psychedelic settings, let alone design frameworks that position the environment as a control variable in clinical trials. And truthfully, I think that most people understand that where you take psychedelics, whether it be at a rave or in nature, is going to have a very different outcome. But current research protocols treat the setting as a static backdrop rather than which limits our perspective to understanding the efficacy of mechanisms and our ability to optimize treatment outcomes. Currently, organizational efforts to heal both human and planetary health treat our inner nature and outer nature as separate environments, but the regenerative transition aims to move both the therapeutic space and the therapy participant to engage in ongoing transformation towards ecological balance. So here we can think of the setting operating both as a container and a catalyst, like mycorrhizal fungi, which is the scaffolding for soil ecosystems. The therapeutic environment can create the structural stability needed for ego dissolution, while offering navigational frameworks towards ecological balance. So, Carhart-Harris et al. Provides crucial evidence that psychedelics' therapeutic efficacy is fundamentally context dependent, and that neglect of environmental factors can render the experience both clinically ineffective and/or potentially harmful. Yet, current research standards miss these systemic interdependencies by focusing on isolated variables rather than relational patterns. And so, the core question becomes: can we engineer the psychedelic experience through intentional setting design? And the goal here isn't standardization, but rather understanding which setting patterns reliably support therapeutic emergence across diverse populations and contexts. And questions to consider could be: should we design the setting according to the set? And what kind of worlds do we want to design for? What may be meaningful to me is going to be completely different to what's meaningful for somebody else. So we need approaches that capture dynamic setting participant interactions through ecological psychology or complexity science that include network analysis of environmental variables. The deeper opportunity involves creating settings that promote ecological unity rather than human domination, spaces where participants can experience dissolution of self, other, self, nature, boundaries that psychedelics naturally facilitate. So it would be a biopsychosocial approach, which this methodology moves beyond reductionist questions as to whether psychedelics work towards a more nuanced inquiry of how they work within specific contextual reconfigurations, recognizing their therapeutic outcomes emerge from the dynamic interplay rather than isolated variables. So, by examining the interaction effects, we can identify contextual elements that may amplify benefits and develop evidence based environmental design guidelines, establishing setting as a controllable, measurable variable in precision psychedelic medicine rather than an uncontrolled backdrop. So, clinical settings can create a therapeutic enclosure, which is a sterile environment that can mirror the same disconnection, often underlying psychological distress. These controlled spaces operate through isolation and standardization, severed from seasonal rhythms and ecological relationships that historically have contextualized healing practices. So, this enclosure amplifies an inward turning consciousness focused on internal psychological content while remaining cut off from life sustaining webs of relationships. So, the sensory deprivation of clinical neutrality, blank walls, filtered air, controlled lighting, can deepen introspective states while simultaneously severing participants from the relational field and connecting personal and ecological healing. Regenerative design fundamentally shifts this dynamic by creating therapeutic settings that actively demonstrate relational engagement with living systems. Rather than turning inward towards isolated content, participants are invited to turn outward towards larger patterns of connecting personal healing with ecological restoration, bridging the gap between therapeutic insight and systemic understanding of interdependence. So, the living root bridge, which is cultivated by the Khasi people of northeast India, exemplifies a profound systems intelligence that transcends the conventional human nature divide. These bridges, amazing in their ingenuity, grown from malleable fig trees, the roots, they grow over decades and they represent more than ingenious engineering, but they embody a relational ontology where infrastructure emerges through collaborative partnership between human interaction and botanical agency. So, this practice reveals a fundamentally different approach to environmental interaction, one based on reciprocity rather than extraction. So, the bridge strengthens over time, becoming more resilient with age, creating positive feedback loops between human activity and ecosystem health. And this demonstrates what happens when design thinking can operate within ecological temporalities where success is measured over generations. And the seven generation principle, which is an indigenous philosophy, considers how the decisions we make today will impact the seven generations in the future. And these knowledge systems maintain relational technologies, practices that strengthen the coupling between social and ecological systems, representing a fundamentally different paradigm for understanding medicine, not as an intervention upon passive recipients, but a participation in living systems that include and exceed us. So, regeneration in its simplest form is basically what life does everywhere all of the time. Take a deep breath. We're continuously regenerating through our symbiotic relationship with the earth, the oxygen, and water. Our body is made up of 90% water. You are freshwater streams, you are clouds in the sky, you are rivers. So, that's why if the rivers, the streams, the oceans, if they're not healthy, then we too are not. And so regenerative design represents a paradigm shift from mechanical to ecological thinking, from viewing systems as assemblages of parts to understanding them as living networks of relationships. Where sustainability operates through the logic of harm reduction, regenerative design engages the creative dynamics of living systems to restore vitality and evolutionary potential. So, healthy systems exhibit emergent properties that transcend individual components. So, we're all working together. So, this synergistic understanding reveals why sustainability alone proves insufficient. Maintaining current conditions, the status quo, i.e., the capitalist, dualist setting that we find ourselves in, often means preserving degraded baselines, sustaining depleted soils, and fragmented communities and individuals. So, what exactly here do we want to sustain? Rather, can we think about how we would like to regenerate ourselves, the biosphere, the soil? What stories do we need to tell ourselves about what's possible? So, regenerative design approaches to work with the inherent tendency of living systems towards a greater complexity, health, and creative expression. As a design approach, regeneration challenges traditional notions of sustainability and recognizes that doing less harm is not enough. Regenerative design invites us to restore biodiversity, engage with indigenous knowledge systems, and cultivate non extractive relationships with land, materials, humans, and other species. So it goes beyond sustainability, it's got living systems thinking, it's a whole system's health, and it's a reciprocal relationship. And essentially, regenerative design asks how can our interventions leave places and communities more vibrant than when we found them? So, in Darwin's Pharmacy, Richard Doyle introduces the concept of psychedelics as ecodelics, and these substances go beyond merely highlighting interconnection. They are deeply embedded in the environment, facilitating holistic perception and revealing the intricate unfolding of our more than human relationships. So, psilocybin, mushrooms, and peyote are not simply tools for human use, but integral components of the ecosystem's web of relations, prompting us to reconsider our reciprocal relationship with these organisms. So, a framework for a regenerative psychedelic setting can act as a dual function. So, you've got a therapeutic environment which actively restores the ecosystem and creates a dynamic scaffolding which situates the therapy within natural systems. We've got the core mechanism, which a recursive feedback loop between therapeutic healing and ecological restoration. As settings contribute to soil building, water cycling, and biodiversity, they simultaneously enhance therapeutic outcomes. And we've got the dynamic scaffolding, so design structures that evolve seasonally, like forest edges, responding to ecological succession and therapeutic practice wisdom rather than remaining static. And then you've got place-based integration, so a deep understanding of local patterns, seasonal rhythms, and indigenous plant medicine, which will enable designs to enhance ecological and social patterns rather than disrupting them. And you've got therapeutic embodiment, where participants are directly engaged with living systems, understanding how their presence affects soil microbiomes and how intentions influence plant communities and how personal healing connects to regenerative patterns. So, design-based principles, looking at place-based wisdom, we can start with the medicine itself. So, foraging for the medicine can become a place for bioregional attunement. Understanding the connection between locally grown psychedelics and a sense of place can foster a profound connection to land and seasonal rhythms. And the act of identifying these psychedelics can require a heightened awareness of local ecosystems, encouraging observations of soil types and moisture levels. And this localized knowledge can transform a substance use into a situated land based practice. So you can also use living materials. So using materials that breathe, decompose, and regenerate, living materials that can transform the psychedelic setting from static containers into dynamic helo ecosystems. For example, using mycelium. Based building components that can filter air and sequester carbon, living walls, and growing structures that create environments that breathe, respond, and co evolve with participants. So you could include local ecological knowledge, which are complex ecological relationships, and low tech reframes what technology is and how we can synthesize ancient knowledges. For example, here, Earth and Rituals fuses AI-driven design with traditional materials. By utilizing local-based and regenerative living materials, can reinforce the shifts found in participants by demonstrating resilience, adaptation, and symbiotic relationships in real time. Participants can witness the same regenerative processes occurring in the healing and in the natural living environment, bridging both the inner and outer nature. So we can design in accordance with nature, amplify the healing potential of psychedelics, and catalyze deep ecological awareness, creating ritual spaces that honors this interbeing way of relationships. By integrating both biomimicry and biophilia in the design of the setting, we can think about how, in the psychedelic state, heightened perception, sensory heightened perception, will be actually reflected within the environment with spiral fractals and patterns that mimic what's going on internally. And the use of biophilia has already been proven in clinical settings, in healthcare settings. Systemic research has demonstrated that biophilic design creates measurable therapeutic outcomes and benefits across interconnected healthcare systems, revealing that patients with views of nature experience shorter post-operative stays and require fewer pain medications, amongst many other benefits. There are multiple ways in which the setting itself can become regenerative, including journaling spaces, garden trails, building spaces that give back to nature, pollinator gardens, food forests, water harvesting features, sacred functionality, spaces that are not only functional but ritualistic, designed to invoke reverence and transformation. So, this entire approach recognizes that healing ourselves and healing the planet are not separate endeavors. They are interconnected processes that require systemic regenerative approaches. But the tension reveals a deeper systems problem, the gap between theoretical alignment and operational integration between disciplinary boundaries. And so, all of our disciplines work with their distinct methodologies and own ecosystems and knowledge production cycles. But what we could do is learn from each other, where this involves designing research ecologies where findings from one domain create productive constraints and opportunities for others, and we can engage sequentially, building upon each other's and transforming the foundation laid by others. So the key to it is to allow insights to flow between disciplines, and this requires developing new forms of interdisciplinary fluency, where researchers become skilled at recognizing how their findings connect to adjacent knowledge systems. So I have created a regenerative framework, and I would love to connect specifically for the psychedelic setting, and I would love to connect if any of these ideas land for you. And this is precisely where innovation emerges from these interdisciplinary collaborations. And I just want to take the time to thank IPN for their wonderful engagement, and my work coaches and fellow mentee, Fabienne, Angel, and Andrea, and also to our beautiful home, Mother Earth.